и состязаются с китайцами. Мы в Германию приехали со своим дилерством, немцы посмотрели, оценили, сказали, ну это интересно, а следующий шаг какой? Где коробка автомат, где широкий модельный ряд? Мы, как смогли, ответили на этот вопрос, где Евро-6, и на это мы тоже попытались ответить, а на самом деле, конечно, у нас там еще всегда продавалась Нива, и если к Весте отношение было такое подозрительное, ну неплохо, ну, наверное, здорово. Дальше что? Дальше непонятно нам самим, то Нива имела устойчивый спрос. И когда теперь дилерская сеть завершает свое присутствие в Германии и в Европе в частности, и опять все лишаются Нивы, волна патриотов, живущих в Германии, была поднята в полный рост и громко заявлена. Минуточку. АвтоВАЗ. Но вот мы немцы. В основном, конечно, мы бывшие русские. Ну, у нас тут есть и нормальные немцы, такие биологические, с паспортами. Мы не можем без русской Нивы. Неважно, это продиктовано мазохизмом, нищенством, или это 25-я машина в гараже для того, чтобы показывать, ну, некий такой паноптикум и веселить аудиторию. Но все равно мы не можем без Нивы. В каких количествах вы не можете без Нивы? Ну, мы не можем где-то без 2000 Нив в год на территории Германии. Ну, по большому счету, всего ЕС. АвтоВАЗ, останься. АвтоВАЗ пожал плечами и сказал, знаете, ну, в общем, 2000 автомобилей в год в Германии, которые требуют за собой тянуть всю дилерскую сеть, это не бизнес. Не имеет смысла этим заниматься. Тем более, что и Нива, она все-таки не Веста, она сильно-сильно устарела. С ней по Евро-5, а тем более по Евро-6 ты уже не попадаешь в нормы безопасности, которые Евронкапом предписаны, в том числе и Германии, тем более не попадаешь, а в чем-то выделки не стоит. Но для того и русские патриоты, они умеют не только квас любить, они не только прекрасно пляшут в кирзовых сапогах, в вышиванках, они не только пельмени ценят, они еще и могут, если нужно, поднять хорошую волну и объяснить. Немцы не могут без нее. АвтоВАЗ не хочет. Ладно, тогда мы сами. Что мы сами? Мы будем выпускать Ниву. То есть как? Вот так. Мы сейчас посреди Германии развернем где-нибудь там в районе Магдебурга завод и будем выпускать Ниву. А кто вам даст? Правообладателем является АвтоВАЗ. Причем АвтоВАЗ, на минуточку, это на сегодняшний день структура не российская, это международная. Она все-таки входит и в концерн Renault, Nissan, Mitsubishi, Samsung. А вообще-то у нее есть и управляющая компания, и штаб, который находится тоже не в России. И это только очень странная иллюзия, будто здесь есть некий забор незримый, отделяющий Германию от АвтоВАЗа. Поэтому на территории Германии можно творить чего угодно. АвтоВАЗ – это международная организация, если надо, она ножкой топнет так, что мало не покажется. И АвтоВАЗ сказал, но вот эта вот авантюра к нам отношения не имеет. А если вы хотите выпускать Ниву, мы вам этого просто не позволим. Потому что и бренд наш, и репутация наша. В данном случае, без иронии, какая бы она ни была, но это репутация завода. Это не самоделка. Это не три дяди Васи, выпив шнапса на коленке и хрюкнув мастерски, решили все-таки взять при помощи паяльника и болгарки, смастерить автомобиль и сказать: Нива, немчура, покупай, налетай. И это все-таки не месть за Вторую мировую войну. Ну, хватит уже. АвтоВАЗ сказал: не будет. Мы в этом не принимаем участие и никому не позволим. А у наших жужжит. А наши живут в Германии. И нашим очень хочется, потому что бизнес-идея прекрасная. Если существует имя Нива, немцы любят Ниву. Так или иначе. А, кстати, испанцы, французы, если посмотреть по Европе, Нива, она присутствует подальше от городов, но тем не менее всегда. Ниву можно найти в любой европейской части, в любой европейской стране. Там Нива будет, это будет не новая Нива, но она там будет. И бизнес-идея именно в том, что существует репутация завода, существует автомобиль с определенной имиджевой составляющей, давайте мы его поддержим, давайте мы на этом заработаем. Но завод против. Что же тогда делать? И тут появляется некий русский доктор. Ну, он, правда, доктор технических наук, то есть он не медицинский доктор, он такой инженерный доктор. Это на наши деньги это кандидат наук, а в Европе, как вы помните, это у нас только две нужны диссертации защищать, кандидатскую и докторскую, а там одну защитил, то уже доктор. Вот появляется у нас такой доктор из Краматорска, он говорит: а мы будем выпускать Ниву. Ну, хорошо, в Германии. Ну, в крайнем случае, не Ниву. Ну, в крайнем случае, не в Германии. Но делать мы что-то будем. На какие деньги? Знаете, у нас очень мощная команда. А кто еще в вашей мощной команде? Вот если нам не даст АвтоВАЗ делать Ниву, а он не даст, тогда мы ее изобретем с нуля. Мы сделаем другую машину, Ну, мы не знаем, будет ли она похожа, не будет ли она похожа, но у нас есть Владимир Ярцев. Это дизайнер. А то, что сделал Владимир Ярцев, знает вся наша страна, Германия не знает. И, в принципе, весь соцлагерь знает, что сделал Владимир Ярцев. Владимиру Ярцеву официально приписано авторство облика ВАЗ-2110. Вот этого самого страшного, самого уродливого, самого чудовищного нашего автомобиля. Страшнее него, ну, может быть, только новая Нива, но это вряд ли. Я помню, когда Синельников, глава дизайн-студии Пининфорина, дизайн-студия Бертоне, дизайн-студия Синельникова на АвтоВАЗе, когда только была презентация на московском автосалоне, десятки вот этого урода чудовищного, я у Синельникова спросил: а вам не стыдно вот за это? Он сказал: эта машина выполнена в стилистике биодизайна, а эпоха биодизайна еще не наступила. Ну, то есть человек вот сиволапый настолько, это оценочное суждение, что он не в курсе, в мире эпоха биодизайна к тому моменту закончилась уже, причем не первое десятилетие. Ну, вот Ярцев является непосредственным исполнителем. Ярцев сделал десятку. И Ярцев входит в команду с краматорским бизнесменом и доктором, с которым они готовы сделать новый автомобиль. Представляете? Выходит мощный художник и создает новый автомобиль. И тут появляется мощный доктор-бизнесмен, который создает классную бизнес-модель. И суть всего этого — паразитировать на имени, которое вам не принадлежит. С таким же успехом можно прийти в любой провинциальный город нашей страны и сказать: слушай, знаешь, я Mercedes-Benz. В каком смысле? Ну, вот у меня документы, я машину делаю. Какую ты машину делаешь? Я делаю Мерседесы. Так ты что, вот непосредственно из Штутгарта, ты вот тот самый немец, который потомок и владелец бренда? Ну, практически да. Ну, я вот делаю. Ну, правда, я свой Мерседес делаю в Краматорске, и я его делаю при помощи болгарки, окрашу я его лаком для ногтей, который взял у жены. Но и называется он не Мерседес. Ну, слушай, ты мне верь. Я вот делаю Мерседес, потому что я считаю это Мерседес. Такой интересный бизнес-проект. Давайте мы сделаем Ниву. Или не Ниву. Но вы нам верьте, что это Нива. А продавать мы это будем ни в коем случае не в России. Продавать мы это будем немцам. А немцам, конечно, им с утра до ночи грезится русская Нива. И они мечтают, чтобы им всунули какую-то подделку и сказали: Ниву помнишь? Помню. Так вот это она, только не она, да это мы сделали, ты нам денег дай. С какой стати я вам должен денег? Ну, это же почти Нива. С чего ты решил? Ну, я так считаю, я руководитель проекта, я доктор, я знаю. Хотите, я температуру померю? Правда, я технический доктор, я могу температуру вам померить только штангенциркулем, но в том месте, в котором вам не понравится. Денег дай. Есть третий участник этого проекта, это совладелец и бывший генеральный директор Дервейса. Завод Дервейс скончался, потому что умер его отец-основатель. Вот это был проект одного очень умного человека, фамилии Дерев. Там несколько людей, носящих эту несклоняемую фамилию. Дерев был невероятно талантливым, очень изобретательным, очень толковым. И он придумал делать автомобильный завод в той земле, в той территории, среди тех людей, где заводы промышленного производства делать нечего. Это была с его стороны очень оптимистичная, очень обнадеживающая идея. Она держалась только на одном человеке. Если бы Дерев был бы жив, тогда завод Дервейс вполне возможно еще бы существовал. Дерев умер, и после этого завод какое-то время еще поколыхался на волне. Он попытался заниматься контрактной сборкой китайцев, ничего не получилось. У него чудовищное совершенно качество. Мои инсайдеры с Дервейса рассказывали о том, кто из них и как отработал сегодня смену. Они мне просто в конце рабочего дня рассказывали о своих подвигах, как и что конкретно они там наваяли. Это совершенно чудовищно. И качество самих рабочих и качество материалов, из которых они собирали, то китайцев, то других китайцев, то что-то собственное автономное, это ужас абсолютный. Ну, не получалось никак автомобили у них. Есть еще парочка человек, и самое главное, что нету денег. Ну вот нету денег. И нету машины. И нету ничего.
Приветствую, приветствую.
Двигателя нету.
Очень рад видеть.
Нету, коробок нету. Ну и ничего нету. То есть есть идея такая. Нива ушла, и мы эту Ниву попробуем во что бы то ни стало как-нибудь, может быть, по крайней мере, на ней заработать. Вероятнее всего, суть здесь, конечно же, не в Ниве, суть только в деньгах. И в интервью порталу Drom.ru вот этот доктор из Краматорска рассказал, цитирую: «У нас есть то, что готово вложить земельное правительство Германии. Это крупные суммы, большие беспроцентные кредиты и безвозмездные субсидии от проектов по развитию инфраструктуры». Вот о чем идет речь.
Ну-ка, подвинься, засранец.
Вкладываться немцы в том, чтобы у них построили завод по производству непонятно чего. Немцы, вот они такие ручные. Они едят с ладошки, и, видимо, у них есть какая-то тяга к русским, которым они не все контрибуции, репарации выплатили. Наши этим пользуются, наши молодцы. У наших такая бизнес-стратегия. Помните, в старой крепости был девиз, когда ребята там нашли иностранцев, иностранных коммунистов, как потом выяснилось. Но там было брошено: обожрем буржуев. И они попытались обожрать этих буржуев. По-моему, вот эта стратегия по сию пору в действии. Регионы, простите. Я не слышу студию, я не знаю, что там.
Эхо твоего города вместе с радио «Эхо Москвы».
А пока где-то наши русские пытаются в очередной раз разобраться с немцами по поводу: ну вы не Ниву, но хотя бы за ваши же деньги у нас купите что-нибудь того, чего пока нет. Похожий сценарий разворачивается на территории нашей страны, то есть это уже продукт внутреннего потребления, хотя тоже, конечно же, с экспортными амбициями. Если вдруг где-то кто-то у нас тянется к кормушке, особенно государевой, то он, конечно, начинает сразу в состоянии эйфории тягаться с Западом. Ну, как иначе? Мы же тут такие ребята все. У нас вон, видели, в городе имени Инны, там центр компетенций. Так это далеко. Мы, в принципе, везде такие талантливые. Страна у нас просто усеяна людьми, готовыми получить от государства денег, и после этого уж блеснуть, так блеснуть. Уж утереть нос за границей, так утереть. Мы так, в принципе, готовы даже были бы в футбол выиграть. Ну, правда, не получается почему-то. Ну, если что, если по нашим правилам, то мы точно обыграем. Речь идет о нашем печальном российском электрическом автомобиле. У него такое хорошее русское название «Зетта». Странное название. Был такой самобеглый холодильник BMW Zetta. Возможно, что здесь гораздо больше прямых последствий и отсылок именно к этому оригиналу, потому что то, что собираются сделать наши, или собирались сделать наша вот Zetta, она такая же на уровне и идеологически, и технически автомобили для нищих. Когда разоренная войной Германия лежала в руинах и возрождала экономику, благодаря американской поддержке и здравомыслию, то у них автомобилем считалось все, что может ползать, ездить и издавать звук соответствующий, поэтому были какие-то чудовищные конструкции типа «Мистер Шмидт кабин-роллер». По сию пору в музее желанное изделие, потому что второй раз такую карикатуру, огрызок самолета, ползущий по дороге, никто родить уже не сможет. Крайне низкая степень обнищания. И вот тогда же как раз холодильник был поставлен в привычное вертикальное положение. Спереди 2 колесика, сзади 2 колесика, сдвоенных настолько, что машина казалась трехколесной. Это была и итальянская конструкция. Собственно, итальянцы это придумали. Итальянцы вообще любят, несмотря на свое огромное семейство. В Италии много детей по тем временам было нормой, но они же придумали Fiat Topolino. Машина двухместная, которую охотно покупали папы, имеющие не только жену, но и 10 детей. Вот они как-то все вместе на этой штуковине ехали. Итальянцы, в принципе, умеют делать маленькие машинки по сию пору, может быть, наравне с французами лучше всех на планете Земля. И итальянцы сделали маленькую машинку, немцам это понравилось, и компания BMW начала ее производить. BMW Zetta. Страшилище абсолютно, очень карикатурное изделие. Быстро, конечно же, поумнели, разбогатели и отказались. И вот проходит исторический виток, и в России решили: а мы сделаем машину для убогих. Давайте предположим, в бизнес-план так и напишем: все люди идиоты, мы всех обманем, под это дело мы получим государственные инвестиции, выпускать мы ничего не будем, машины у нас никакой нет, производственная площадка у нас не готова, но мы очень хотим денег, а также в визитной карточке будет написано что-нибудь красивое, там, генеральный директор, президент корпорации, главный дизайнер, там, главный водопроводчик. Здорово же, и зарплата идет. Давайте мы это сделаем. Хорошо, давайте. Будет называться, Zetta будет называться. называться эта машинка. Машинки как таковой в действительности еще нет. Есть некоторое количество ходовых макетов, сделанных по обходной технологии. Катастрофа абсолютно. И это все было бы, наверное, какой-нибудь частной вознёй в глубине инвестиционных потоков, не очень понятных и не очень ясных, но когда проект начал загибаться, с ним пришлось вылезти уже на самый верх. И вдруг, откуда ни возьмись, Мантуров появляется соучастником этого дела и заявляет: а это на минуточку федеральный министр. И федеральный министр говорит: ZET-то состоится. И сейчас как раз обсуждается 100 миллионов рублей. Экспертный совет Фонда развития промышленности в конце августа будет рассматривать эти 100 миллионов. Нужно будет подкинуть на несуществующую машину, чтобы она состоялась. Кстати, а машинка будет шикарная, она будет как холодильник, она будет двухместная, она будет даже иногда ездить, а потом, если что, мы, может быть, еще и попробуем ее продавать. Так, у немцев все понятно, немцам мстит сейчас проект Нивы от доктора из Краматорска. У французов и так проблемы, а мы отомстим кому? Китаю мы пока отомстить не можем, тем более, что по-любому будут делать машины из китайских комплектующих, потому что в России нету ничего для производства электрических автомобилей. Вообще производственная база отсутствует. Это, знаете как, в Зимбабве тоже в космос не летают, не с чего. Так, мы отомстим, наверное, Индии. Точно. Мы будем делать нашу Зетту на экспорт в Индию. Вот. Индусы нам что-то давно не нравятся, мы им отомстим. Но это если нам Мантуров, который теперь является официальным рупором проекта, непонятно с какой стати, отберет вот у тех самых условных 20 миллионов голодных людей в нашей стране, живущих официально по статистике ниже уровня бедности, 100 миллионов рублей. Потому что нам очень надо, у нас будет проект, и мы его сделаем. А в это самое время в Турции тоже вдруг решили делать электромобили. И Турция – это страна, которая имеет производственные площадки Фиата, Рено, Форда, Тойоты, Хёнде. Турция, в общем, на своих ногах стоит более стабильно, чем мы с вами. И чем нам может показаться эта Турция стабильно стоящей. Они для себя производят практически все, что им нужно. За исключением сотовых телефонов, хотя тоже не факт. И вот в Турции решили, что у них будет предприятие под названием ТОГГ с двумя Г на конце. И Реджеп Таипович Эрдоган выступает у них как наш Мантуров в качестве рекламного носителя, объясняющего, что этот проект состоится. Но турецкий-то проект полностью на свои деньги. Там нет государственных. Группа людей, 5 конкретно участников, нашли инвестиции, придумали в Бурсе построить завод в чистом поле, определили, сколько сотен тысяч автомобилей, 5 разных моделей, а модельный ряд у них уже готов, они собираются выпускать. И теперь у них идет разговор о том, что, во-первых, по срокам они полностью успевают, у них действительно этот завод будет. Во-вторых, экспортная планка у них прийти в Германию, дизайн у них уже проработан, ходовые макеты уже есть. Реджеп Таипович даже показывал, как оно ездит. И они заложили 5 моделей, на которые, как минимум, интересно смотреть. Это не убогий холодильник для нищих под названием «А мы вас, дураком, сейчас обманем». Нет, а давайте по-честному, потому что когда цель Германия, и вот такая цель, это частные инвесторы, это не государственные люди, которые решили просто распилить деньги. Это не бывшие иммигранты из России, которые знают, что у федеральных земель есть собственный бюджет, давайте мы с ними по этому поводу тревожно поговорим. Это совершенно другая бизнес-идея. И у турок, может быть, и получится. Но, конечно же, у них основной турецкий потребитель, внутренний потребитель. И здесь самая большая проблема, самое большое препятствие. Турция не самая богатая страна, социальное расслоение там тоже есть. И уговорить людей на 175 тысяч автомобилей в год довольно трудно. Германия, понятно, что она не возьмет к себе большое количество вот этих экспортных, пришедших из ниоткуда турецких автомобилей электрических. Соответственно, потребитель основной будет в Турции. Инвестиции составляют порядка 4 миллиардов долларов. И все они – это частный риск группы людей. Все они ни в коем случае не подразумевают, что это будут деньги Мантурова или какого-то фонда. Поэтому у турок тоже может не получиться. Но они все-таки чуть ближе к реализации, чуть более здравы, и они рискуют на свои. Скорее всего, у них получится. Турки – это такие вот очень специфические люди, которые достигают своих целей. Про политику не говорю, про экономику. Когда они захотели себе автомобильную промышленность, они получили свою автомобильную промышленность. И ее закономерное развитие – это появление собственного электромобиля. Ну что ж, желаю всем успеха. До завтра.
«Гараж». Программа Сергея Слоняна. С понедельника по четверг. С 14 до 15. На радио «Эхо Москвы».
Радиостанция «Эхо Москвы» представляет программу «Экономика».
Всем доброго дня, с вами Владимир Левченко. Основные новости на финансовых рынках, которые мы наблюдаем последние дни, это то, что происходит на рынке драгоценных металлов. Если фактически всю прошлую неделю, можно сказать, что абсолютное большинство, если не все мои коллеги, посвящали рекордному взлету цен на драгоценные металлы, на золото, на серебро, цены на золото обновляли постоянно свои абсолютно исторические максимумы, то сейчас цены на золото рекордно рухнули. Понятно, что в моменте мы видим некий отскок, причем отскок достаточно существенный, но история торгов золотым металлом учит нас, что вот такие сильные однодневные падения, а накануне цены на золото потеряли 5% от своих максимумов, которые составляли примерно $2070 за тройскую унцию, золото теряло около 10%, снижаясь отметки в 1870, но сейчас 1950. Такие сильные однодневные падения никогда не проходят бесследно. Понятно, что после этого бывает какой-то отскок, но дальше цена, как правило, направляется вниз и снижается, что называется, долго и счастливо. Вместе с ценами на драгоценные металлы снизились цены и на металлы промышленные, что указывает на то, что вот какого-то заметного восстановления мировой экономики точно нет. Цены на нефть пока держатся около отметки $45 за бочку, но, как мы видим, на отечественной экономике это, в общем, особенно не помогает. Это только вот пузыри на фондовых рынках раздувает, и у нас, в общем, в том числе. Но, кроме того, что те, кто на последнее время не покупал драгоценные металлы, сейчас локально находится в минусе. Это еще и достаточно вообще важный сигнал в целом для глобальных финансовых рынков. Это говорит о том, что глобальные центральные банки, и прежде всего американский центральный банк, начали бороться с подобной динамикой цен на драгоценные металлы, ну, а, соответственно, бороться только с динамикой цен на золото, без того, чтобы это не привело к снижению цен на все остальные активы в мире, невозможно. То есть американский центральный банк был вынужден пойти на то, чтобы рынок поднял процентные ставки в долларах, потому как именно из-за работы печатного станка и экстремально и искусственно заниженных процентных ставок во всех валютах и в долларах в том числе мы видели такое массовое бегство, причем именно физических лиц в драгоценные металлы. То есть очень похоже на то, что вот это вот падение цен на драгоценные металлы, оно является началом таких достаточно серьезных кризисных явлений. Ну, что касается у нас, чем это может для нас грозить? Ну, например, есть такое понятие, как дефолтный курс рубля. Да, что это значит? Это берется вся совокупная денежная масса рублевая и делится на весь объем золота валютных резервов нашего центрального банка. Ну, мы получаем такой как бы уровень курса рубля, куда он может снизиться, да, при развитии кризисных тенденций. Но вот сейчас, там даже вот по последним данным, при цене на золото там даже более высокой, курс составлял там около 100 рублей за доллар. При том, что реальный курс там 73 с небольшим. Вот давайте вспомним, что было, к примеру, в 2014 году, когда рубль только начинал ослабевать, еще там перед, что называется, крымскими событиями. Тогда как раз вот такой дефолтный курс рубля составлял примерно 65 рублей за доллар, ну а номинальный, там, как все помнят, составлял около 34. Что получилось? Ну, к концу 14-го, к началу 15-го года курс рубля как раз туда и пришел, там 60-70 рублей за доллар.
Это были новости экономики в программе «Экономика».
Радио «Эхо Москвы».
В Москве 15 часов. У микрофона Марина Старостина. В начале часа на Эхе информационная программа. Траурные мероприятия, посвященные памяти моряков подводной лодки «Курск», проходят сегодня в разных городах России. МВД Беларуси признает применение огнестрельного оружия во время акции протеста в Бресте. Академия наук сообщает, что в иностранных журналах обнаружено более 20 тысяч сомнительных российских публикаций.
Вы слушаете информационную программу «Эхо».
В Санкт-Петербурге состоялась панихида по погибшим 20 лет назад морякам подводной лодки «Курск». Во время богослужения все члены экипажа были названы поименно. Гибель «Курска» должна быть не просто траурным событием, но и важным уроком для современного поколения, считает глава Санкт-Петербургского клуба моряков-подводников Игорь Курдин.
Если мы забудем о гибели «Курска», о гибели 118 членов ее экипажа, значит, их смерть была напрасна. Потому что об этом надо не только помнить, но и делать выводы. И конструкторам, и строителям подводных лодок, но в первую очередь тем, кто сейчас, вот сегодня, в это время выходит на атомных дизельных субмаринах. Если они не сделают выводы из катастрофы «Курска», значит, их смерть была напрасна.
Траурные мероприятия проходят сегодня и в других городах России, в частности в Курске, Калининграде, Воронеже, Севастополе. Подводная лодка «Курск» затонула в Баренцевом море во время учений. По официальной версии, в носовом отсеке субмарины взорвалась торпеда. МИД Украины направил России очередную ноту протеста, на сей раз из-за военных учений в Крыму. В Киеве считает, что маневры, начавшиеся 10 августа, нарушают нормы международного права. Ранее российский МИД возвращал подобные ноты обратно, подчеркивая, что Россия не должна согласовывать действия на своей территории с правительствами других стран. В МВД Беларуси сообщают, что милиция применила огнестрельное оружие во время акции протеста в Бресте. По версии милицейского ведомства, на силовиков напала группа агрессивно настроенных граждан с арматурой в руках, а предупредительные выстрелы вверх их не остановили. Один из нападавших в итоге был ранен. В Бресте столкновения протестующих с ОМОНом произошли накануне вечером. В Академии наук России утверждают, что нашли в иностранных журналах почти 25 тысяч сомнительных российских публикаций. О скандале в научной сфере Андрей Гаврилов.
Многочисленные факты плагиата обнаружила комиссия Российской академии наук по противодействию фальсификации научных исследований. Там изучили около сотни зарубежных журналов, включенных в крупнейшие базы данных Web of Science и Scopus, и нашли фрагменты статей других российских авторов, автоматически переведенные на английский язык. В этом, как утверждают в РАН, участвовали больше 30 руководителей университетов и их подразделений, а всего 1000 с лишним авторов публикаций, увлеченных в плагиате. В общей сложности в иностранных журналах было опубликовано почти 24 тысячи статей, вызвавших подозрения. Стоимость одного такого материала могла доходить до 6 тысяч евро, отмечается в докладе, который цитирует агентство ТАСС. Университет Плеханова и Дружбы народов в Москве, Казанский федеральный университет и ряд других вузов, их сотрудники, по мнению комиссии РАН, опубликовали больше всего материалов с приватным плагиатом. Их размещали в иностранных журналах за деньги в открытом доступе, без рецензирования, отметили в Академии наук.
Примерно в 10% случаев сомнительные статьи в иностранных журналах были опубликованы на деньги научных фондов, говорится в докладе. Российский бизнес, по подсчетам экспертов, потерял свыше 1,5 триллиона рублей из-за эпидемии коронавируса. Падение прибыли они называют худшим как минимум за 16 лет. Об исследовании Олег Овчаренко.
Сильнейший убыток, по данным отчета международной аудиторско-консалтинговой сети «Финэкспертиза», получили в целом около трети российских компаний. Речь идет о периоде с марта по май этого года, наиболее тяжелым с точки зрения ограничений по коронавирусу. И хотя оставшиеся 2/3 компаний смогли получить прибыль в размере чуть более 3 триллионов рублей, март оказался убыточным для российского бизнеса в целом. Совокупные потери составили 277 миллиардов рублей, говорится в отчете. Предыдущим убыточным месяцем стал январь 2015-го из-за обвала цен на нефть и падения курса рубля. В большинстве регионов бизнесу удалось все-таки получить прибыль по итогам весны, но в 16 субъектах наблюдается чистый убыток, подсчитали в Финэкспертизе. Лидером по нему стала Москва, где компании совокупно потеряли 85 миллиардов рублей. При этом по динамике роста убытков в лидерах Ингушетия. Там они увеличились более чем в 33 раза. А вот в Республике Алтай, напротив, бизнес смог увеличить прибыль почти в 7 раз. По мнению экспертов, из-за закрытия границ России и, следовательно, наплыва туристов.
По данным Росстата, во втором квартале ВВП упал в годовом выражении на 8,5%. Это сильнейшее падение российской экономики за 11 лет. Официальный курс доллара на завтра 73 рубля 26 копеек, евро 85 рублей 96 копеек, в Москве плюс 17 градусов сейчас, ночью обещают плюс 11-13, завтра днем плюс 16-18, кратковременные дожди. Марина Старостина, служба информации, Эхо Москвы.
One. Let's get some more details, if we can, about what we heard in the news there about a derailed passenger train in Stonehaven in Aberdeenshire. Emergency services are currently at the scene. Boris Johnson says he's saddened by the incident and his thoughts are with all those affected. I can speak to BBC Radio Scotland reporter David Shanks now. David, thank you for joining us. What can you tell us?
Well, we're about 4 miles out of Stonehaven, a small town in Aberdeenshire, near a place called Carmont. What you can see from where we are is it's an extremely rural location. Looking out across some large green fields, you can see just through a gap in the trees a small gully that still has wisps of smoke coming out. A few hours ago when we first arrived, there was a pillar of strong black smoke coming out from behind the trees. Emergency services here, showing 30 vehicles here, certainly dozens and dozens of ambulances, fire crews, police as well, numerous helicopters too. They've set up a large station here. There's still a lot of activity ongoing, several hours after we were initially warned about the train derailing. What we do know so far is the train is made up of 2 locomotive engines at the front and back with 4 carriages in the middle. It is a passenger train. NHS Grampian, the local health board here, say that they are dealing with a major incident. We still don't have any concrete details on injuries involved in this incident as yet.
Do we have any idea, David, how many passengers were on board?
Not yet. Details, as I say, are still coming in. I think what we're seeing right now is very much the immediate response to the incident. Scant information coming in to us just yet. We are obviously trying to find that out as soon as we can. In the last half an hour, we saw emergency rescue helicopters hovering over a space of track, perhaps 300 metres along from where the smoke would indicate that the train would be. And we could see them winching equipment down and crew members coming down too. And you could see a few people just on the hill in the distance. As I say, we still don't know exactly the nature of what that operation was or how badly anyone has been injured or how many people are involved in this. But as we say, a very serious incident and a very, very large emergency response ongoing.
And what was the weather like in that part of Scotland last night, and could that have been a contributory factor?
Well, obviously too early to say if it was a contributory factor, but the weather has been extraordinary in the last 6 hours. We've gone from the heaviest thunder and lightning perhaps anyone around here has seen in years, with torrential rain, to what we see now, which is blazing clear sunshine, a very, very, very hot day. But there was massive disruption in the northeast of Scotland, both to the roads and rail earlier, with just torrential rain, standing water, causing a lot of disruption. As I say, as to whether that's a contributory factor, too early to say.
David, thank you. So BBC Radio Scotland reporter David Shanks. And as always, we will keep you abreast of what is happening in Stonehaven in Aberdeenshire, where a train has derailed. And as soon as more information comes to us, we shall share that with you here on BBC Radio 5 Live. Now, what's coming up in the rest of the show today? School runnings in a bit. Denise Van Outen is going to be with us, as is Jason Watkins. We're going to be talking blended families, building relationships between much older and much younger siblings. That's quite interesting. And the suggestion by the National Obesity Forum that kids should be weighed at school if they gained a few pounds during lockdown. Now, last night, I spoke to the 4-time Oscar-winning director and writer Oliver Stone. We'll bring you some of that after 2. We discussed his new memoir, Catching the Light, which looks back on his childhood, his time in the Vietnam War, and his rise as a filmmaker in the 70s and 80s. And, of course, the first in his critically acclaimed trilogy of films about Vietnam, Platoon.
The first real casualty of war is innocence. The first real movie about the war in Vietnam is Platoon.
Sammy Barber's Adagio for strings there. Extraordinary film, Platoon. And the book, Catching the Light, deals with that kind of 2-decade period, really, from the mid to late 60s through to the mid-80s when Platoon was released. And it's quite a journey. For this guy, he was at Yale. He dropped out of Yale, an Ivy League university, Oliver Stone, and decided to find meaning by traveling to Vietnam, a country he had been to before the war. And he served 2 tours there in Vietnam and saw some incredible violence, dehumanizing him and those around him. He's a fascinating man with a fascinating life story. So if you can check it out, after 2 o'clock we'll be catching up with Oliver Stone. And also the comedian Alex Edelman is with me after 3. Now he's just released an album of comedy. I was listening to it this morning before we came on air here at 5 Live, and it just made me think how much we all need this. Especially him, he's very, very funny. Here's just a little bit, just like 30 seconds or so, when he finally got to meet his hero, Barack Obama. But before this, do you ever have intrusive thoughts? So he says it, and this is not the bit in the clip, but you know, you're talking to your boss and you think, I wonder what would happen if I just kicked him in the stomach right now. These intrusive thoughts that are really, can be really dark. But luckily, your better urges triumph and prevail and you don't end up acting upon them. Well, here he is talking about, you know, just about to meet Barack Obama.
So I'm waiting for the president, and as he's getting closer to me, the voice in the back of my head is like, when he gets to you, don't punch him in the face. And I'm like, I wasn't gonna punch him in the face. That's my hero. I'm not gonna punch him. And the president sticks his hand out, and I shake it, and he just goes, wow, firm handshake. And like a lunatic, I went, ha, ha, you have no idea.
So Alex Edelman will be here after 3 o'clock. He's such a funny guy. I spoke to him a couple of years ago at the Edinburgh Fringe, and his entire stand-up was based around this story where he tracked down his anti-Semitic trolls on Twitter to a meeting of white nationalists in New York. So we'll guy, I mean, he's Jewish, but he's Orthodox Jewish from Boston, and he turns up at a white nationalist meeting in New York. And he doesn't even say, I mean, you kind of got to rate people who are that racist in a city like New York. I mean, that must be so much effort. It's fine. You can be a racist in a place which is fairly monocultural and you are the predominant culture, because there's not a lot that's going to annoy you. But as he points out, if you're anti-Semitic in New York, and he says this, you're walking along literally going, Jew, 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 American Italian, Jew, Jew. Like, it's so much effort. Now, he is not, of course, respecting their opinions. They're idiots. But he does kind of say, well, that's a lot of effort to be that hateful in a city like New York. So Alex Edelman is going to be on the show after 3 o'clock. Stick around for that as well. But it is Wednesday. It is the first hour. It's School Runnings, which is our weekly look at all things family and parenting. And since lockdown, we've just had this amazing array of guests. People that you will know because they're in the public eye, but perhaps you won't know so much about their family setup and their thoughts about being parents. So it's always revelatory, fascinating. People we've had, with Michael Hussein, of course, with the Bake Off here, we've had Ben Shepherd on. Lots and lots of very interesting people. And today we carry on with two very... Denise Van Outen is here. Now she's mother to a 10-year-old girl. And also, we have the BAFTA award-winning actor Jason Watkins. He's going to be starring in the upcoming drama Des, which is going to air on ITV in September. That's alongside David Tennant, who was on the show yesterday. We're having a Des week here on 5 Live. Now, Jason is a dad to a 24-year-old, a 22-year-old, a 13-year-old, and an 8-year-old. Jason, Denise, hello.
Hi. Hello, good afternoon.
Great to have you here on the show. It wasn't that long ago, Denise, we had you on because you like dressing up as a fox and singing, don't you? Are you still doing much of that?
Occasionally.
Are you still doing much of that?
No, do you know what? I was saying my outfit was coming really handy during the lockdown. I had my own PPE, didn't I?
Yes.
Completely protected behind the mask.
Possibly not in a heat wave, though, I'm thinking.
No, exactly. Not suitable for today.
Did you see Miranda Hart's tweet this morning? Talking of foxes.
No.
She said that she went to sleep on her kitchen floor because it was the coldest part with her back doors all open into the garden, and she woke up this morning to have a fox about a centimetre from her face.
Wow. Oh no, that's scary.
Yeah. Did she think it was a dream? I suppose she might have thought it was a dream.
Well, she said she wants to kind of resurrect Miranda in order to put that back in, because it's potentially a very good sketch, I'm thinking. How are you both coping in the heat? Denise, how are you?
Well, I'm currently sitting on the wooden floor with my back against the door, trying to prevent my 10-year-old child from bursting in to ask for another ice lolly. You know, it's been hot, but I'm not going to complain because I actually enjoy the sunshine and the fact that we've all had to stay at home this year pretty much on a staycation summer. I think when you've got kids or, you know, children around you, it's great to be able to do things outdoors. So I'm not going to complain.
No, you're not one of those who's kind of complaining, well, yeah, how cold and wet and horrible it is, and then we have 2 days of sun and just go, oh, it's outrageous. What have it cold again? Jason, how are you coping? You sleeping well?
Well, yeah, not too bad actually. I've got the windows open, obviously, and I'm sitting here in my swimming trunks as a kind of, sort of pathetic gesture at a holiday. I've got a T-shirt on as well.
Okay.
You just get rid of that image.
Trunks and socks.
Yeah,
and sandals.
Always.
No,
I'm not a great fan of the heat. I'm with my sort of colouring, but I think Denise is absolutely right. We shouldn't moan about it, and the fact that we can't actually go away on holiday, particularly. It's nice to have a little bit of sunshine where we live at home.
It's the great thing about doing radio interviews, isn't it? The pair of you can Jason can be there in his trunks.
You're just terrorising your listeners.
And Jason, you do like Twitter, so I think it would be remiss of you not to put a picture of this up on your Twitter account at some point throughout the day. People, now that you've teased people with this image, see if it lives up.
Okay. What do you mean lives up? No, okay.
It will, of course it will. Today we're going to be discussing blended families, older and younger children, and are they feeling the knock-on effects of the pandemic more than most? Also, this story that the National Obesity Forum has been calling for children to be weighed in school to make sure their weight is under control following lockdown. This has come under criticism from body positivity campaigners who say this could trigger eating disorders. So what do you, listening to 5 Live, think about that idea, your kids going back to school in September and being weighed? And also unmissables, if we get to it. We never really do, but we'll try. Ideas to entertain the whole family. As always, while Denise, Jason and myself are having a conversation, you're very much part of that conversation. So join in at any point on 85058, the text with observations, thoughts, ideas, questions, or you give us a call, 08085 909 693. Well, look, let's start with the blended families. One of the things we wanted to speak about today was that, given how both of my guests have them. Now, Jason, you have 2 older children from your first marriage, as well as your 2 younger children with your wife. Denise, you have your 10-year-old daughter, and your partner, Eddie, has 2 older children. So, Denise, what is the key to having a successfully blended family, do you think?
Well, it's taken a bit of time because obviously initially, both Eddie's children are in their 20s now.
Yeah.
So we've been together 6 years. So I never really had to do this sort of every other weekend with Eddie's children, which in some ways, it delayed us kind of really getting to know each other, which I've loved lockdown because I've been able to spend more time with his children. His daughter came and locked down with us for about a month towards the end of lockdown. I know we're sort of still in it, but when it eased, she came to stay with us, and it was lovely because I suddenly thought I've never had this opportunity to get to know her really on this level. I think probably for Eddie it was tougher because he'd obviously raised his children, they're grown up, and then he had to go through it all again.
Right.
So, being woken up early in the morning, the tantrums and all of that. But
when older children come into your life, Denise, like that, what do you think your role is? And how do you kind of navigate your way through this new relationship?
I try to be a friend and I try to not get too involved in their lives because obviously I'm not their mum. And I'm not really in a position, because they're in their 20s, to upset them in any way. Do you know what I mean? I think when children are younger, you can discipline them obviously a little bit more. Like Eddie obviously is really good with Betsy and he has Lee her dad's blessing, that, you know, he will often say to her that if she's doing something that's not right, you know, he'll say to her, you're being naughty, and they have their little moments. But obviously his children are older, so it's a kind of step back a little bit, and I just try to be a friend, but not to get too involved in anything.
So does that mean you would never discipline them? You would never?
No.
Right.
I mean, Leah, his daughter's 21. She's so lovely. I can't even imagine her ever doing anything wrong to even upset me or anything. She's just so lovely and adorable. I've recently obviously got to know her very well. His son, we don't see as much because he's 25 and he shares a flat with a friend, and as most 25-year-olds are off doing their own thing. But yeah, I think maybe it's probably harder for them to see their dad suddenly take on somebody else's younger child. That must be hard. So I'm very conscious of the fact that, you know, that it's very sensitive for them as well, you know, because obviously they weren't expecting there to be a breakup with their parents, and then suddenly their dad's now living in a different house and helping to raise, you know, my daughter who's 10 and doing the school run and all those kind of things that he used to do for them. So that must be harder, and I'm very aware of it.
Is it your job to make them, though, feel as though that your daughter is not replacing them? Is that your job or Eddie's job?
I think we both kind of do it, really. We just make sure that they have, even though they're older, that they're worthy and deserve the same sort of attention. So we still do really nice things for them and with them, because I think it's really important. But at the same time, there is a boundary I would never overstep, because obviously they have got their mum, you know, and she's obviously done a brilliant job in raising, because they're both lovely human beings, and I adore both of them. But it's just knowing when to sometimes step out of situations where I just go, actually, they're adults now, you know. My opinion doesn't really count. It's for them to discuss it with their dad and to come to some kind of resolve. Whereas if it was a child, I think if you are living in the same house and there is an issue, then it is fine for a step-parent to step in and say something.
How do you describe yourself in that relationship? Are you stepmum? Is that how you describe yourself?
Well, it took a long time, but we've only recently started to use the stepmum term, which is bizarre, really. Because I don't know how it even came about, but I think it came about probably because of my daughter, because she brought up I'd never even thought about it, really. And she said to me, oh, you know, about you're a stepmum to Leah and Jordan. I was like, oh, I am, really, I suppose.
Right. Oh, Jason, your eldest children live in a different part of the country, so how has that been since March for you? I mean, how often were you seeing them before?
Well, I suppose my boys are old. You know, they are 24, 22, and they're both in Manchester. And
good place to be in their 20s.
Yeah,
That's a great
exactly.
city to be in your 20s.
Yeah, exactly. They're not far. They've been together in lockdown. They've been living in a flat together, not far from where you're speaking now, actually. And so I think it's been really good for them to have the amount of time together. Freddie, my eldest, has been in London at the university and has just sort of graduated. So last year, so they're sort of they've been together. And pre-lockdown, we were seeing a lot of Freddie, obviously, because he was at university, which has been really great. And so I think we are feeling the lack of seeing him, and both of them really. It's been quite difficult. I mean, we've got Freddie's been helping out with Gilbert, who's my 8-year-old here, tutoring on Zoom, which has been fantastic and given us a much-needed help in terms of tutoring. But yeah, actually,
what subjects?
Well, you know, the whole sort of kids, you know, reading, writing, English, maths, everything, all the things I'm rubbish at. Freddie's been able to step forward and, so, you know, just because of the work that's been given to Gilbert by his school, then, you know, we had quite an intense period of homeschooling, and that was the sort of big news our end, I think. So Freddie and Pip it was great to have, albeit a Zoom meeting, you know, have maintained that contact. And I suppose just following on from, you know, what Denise was saying, you know, we've always tried to see ourselves as one family. You know, it goes through many phases from the beginning. You know, we had my first one, you know, when one separates, it's not always easy. And, you know, Caroline was absolutely brilliant at that. And being able to, we always put the children first. And as it's grown, we've always seen ourselves as one big family, and that we call, their brother and sister that aren't half brother. That term isn't used. And the added bonus is this great sort of, it's wonderful that Gilbert, my youngest, has 2 older siblings, and it's a wonderful dynamic sometimes where you just, if you go out, when we used to go out, birthday parties and stuff at a restaurant, to see everyone together and that it's okay, having been through, a certain amount of difficulties in breakups, etc., and all those dynamics. So, that's been so we're missing that actually. It's one thing that lockdown has created.
How did you reassure your 2 eldest, because they were 11 and 9 when Bessie came along? Right? So how did you reassure them that they weren't going to be replaced in any way? Because presumably, they may not have ever felt that way, but I'm making an assumption here, but I just wonder.
Well, Nihal, it's difficult because I think most parents who, it's difficult to talk about, you've broken up, the marriage is broken up, and you're the one who's done it for whatever reason, that you do carry an amount of, that's something you've got to get your head around in terms of parenting your children and the guilt you feel of perhaps denying your family the sort of nuclear sort of family, which is not always perfect in itself, one has to say, So, that if you're honest about what happened as they get older and just shower them with as much love as you can, that when siblings come along from another marriage, that they become involved in their care and delight in them as much as you are, and I think the rest follows really. And always be available to talk about things,
How did you deal with your own anguish around that? Because we as parents, we're constantly questioning whether we're doing a good job or not at the best of times.
God, yeah. Well, I don't know. It's difficult. It's sort of still
just took on loads more acting work.
Yeah, well, there's just bury my head in the sand and just worked and never spoke to my children. Yeah, that's one way of doing it.
Solid.
Who's that bloke? Oh, that bloke on the television used to be my dad. Hasn't he changed? God, his name's seen for years. I think you've got to put them first, haven't you? You've got to try and not be consumed by your own worries and look at them and see what they need, and always be available. So I remember speaking to Pip once in America, on a holiday, and we were in some mall in sort of heat, a bit like it is now, and I think Pip would have been about sort of 10 or 11, and we talked about stuff. It was and I was sort of trepidatious, but he raised it, and we had this great sort of half an hour discussion about it. And it was a wonderfully alleviating feeling that, he's okay and that he's thinking about it, and that, it's nothing, he's not burying anything, because I think that's the thing you worry about, is that they bury their thoughts and aren't able to share it. And as we know about all sorts of things within the family, the more you talk about it, the better it is for everybody.
Denise, was that similarly with you in terms of how kind of Eddie had to deal with his own kind of, I don't know if he did feel guilt or not, it was just that Jason brought that word up, or anguish about it?
Apologies, I just lost you then for a second.
Oh, it's just, how did you and Eddie have a conversation about that, about other kids, and Jason used the word kind of guilt and anguish, and how they're going to be happy, etc.
It is a hard one, and I think we did everything in baby steps. Like when we met, we only moved in together just 18 months ago.
Oh, wow.
Which we just really took our time, and it was mainly because Betsy was obviously very young. I've got a really, really good relationship with her father. I was waiting for him to meet someone and to feel secure and settled down as well. And we just did everything very, very gradually. And of course, for his children, by the time we have moved in together, his children are grown up and they completely understand now anyway the situation. So I think it's okay. I do recall quite early on that we went on a holiday. We took my daughter actually skiing, and I remember Eddie felt quite bad about it because he said, this is something I used to do with my kids, and I hope they're not upset because I haven't been able to do that with them this year. And I was suddenly like, I hadn't even thought of that. But then when he spoke to them, they were fine about it. You do get those moments when you just have to go, well, hang on a minute, how do they feel? Or how will this make them feel? Even to the point that we took my daughter when she was younger to Disney to go on a trip, you know, and Eddie had never been. And I said to him, well, you've got to come, you have to just have the experience. And I think even that moment for him was like, oh, I don't know if I feel bad about doing this because I never had the chance to do it because he had his kids very young and he couldn't afford to go there when he was younger. And he said, I don't want them to think, oh, you know, that I'm doing things with your daughter that I never did with them. But they were fine about it. And, you know, I think it must be quite hard.
And in terms of your role in that, in the support that you give, how does that manifest itself?
I just think I do think the kids always come first in any situation of their feelings, and I'm very mindful of the fact, and I just think it should always be a happy home when we're all together, and even when we're not together we should all feel content and happy. So I'd always do everything I can to make sure that, and even for Betsy's father as well, you know, even the whole Disney thing, I remember when we went, I actually went with him. First we weren't even together, and I was actually dating Eddie. And the first time we took Betsy, I went with her dad, and I wasn't dating him anymore, we'd split up. Because I would always say to him that, you know, if we get to do some of those experiences, even though we're separated, I'll make sure we're together to do it. So on both sides, we all have to be understanding. But I think Eddie gets it because he grew up with, he was raised by a stepfather, and his dad and his stepfather always got on brilliantly. I mean, he calls them both dad, so it's very confusing to me. When he's on the phone, I'll say, who was that? And he'll go, I was just talking to dad. And I'm like, which one?
Wow.
But yeah, so his situation is even more bonkers. When he was growing up, his biological father ended up becoming best friends with his stepdad, and they actually went into business together.
Whoa. That is. Yeah, that's a big one. That is.
And they're still friends now.
That's good.
Yeah, that is good.
Which is really good. But this is why I think we're in a situation where we're all very understanding, very respectful. We've all had, you know, growing up, have seen what the outcome is if you don't make the effort to get along and how it affects the kids at any age. And it doesn't matter, you know, Betsy's obviously young, but Eddie's kids are grown up, but they would still feel affected by any arguments. It doesn't matter how old you are, people don't like that unsettled feeling. It's horrible.
Jason, did you have a model for this at all? You know, like, this was all completely new to you, in the sense that you'd seen it parents' generation or with friends, etc.
In terms of as a sort of separation, what one should do.
Yeah, in terms of
that
situation.
Well, I suppose my parents separated when I was 14, which is not a great age for an adolescent boy, and I think that was hard. I don't know how well I sort of buried myself in sport. Actually, talk about burying myself in running away. I sort of ran away into sport, really. And I did find it very hard. And I think both my parents, without being unfair to them, are now older, that it was a very difficult separation, and that beyond the initial separation, that they haven't particularly got on very well, and without wanting to be critical, that has been it can be a little difficult, but you know,
you were determined to not do that. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely, and you know, they have their reasons, and it's always complicated. But absolutely, and I think Caroline. It's funny actually. My first wife, Caroline, is now married to Chris Gascon, who's Peak Bar in Coronation Street. And I was doing a comedy called Duck Patrol years and years ago. Chris had an appearance in that before we sort of split up, so there's this weird connection. And Chris has been brilliant with the boys. And so, you know, our daughter Bessie goes on holiday with them occasionally to France. So, you know, there is this sort of, again, this feeling. But in terms of a role model, I don't know, actually. I think you find your way through these things, don't you? And in a way, families are so different, aren't they? And so are unique in many ways. And it's a way of having a good attitude and being open to what's around you and trying to adapt and trying to do what's best. And, you know, one doesn't always manage to do that. I mean, we're having challenges a little bit now. Our daughter's now 13, and you know, we're getting to sort of teenage years, and it's, you know, it's not easy. And I've not had experience of that. You know, there's no I'm finding that quite difficult. You know, trying to, she's got to have her own. It's a sort of separation. She's got to have her own life, make her own decisions, mistakes, etc. And it's quite sort of volatile, put it that way. So, but yeah, it's. Almost like another adult that is part of the family but doesn't have the intensity of a father-daughter relationship.
Yeah.
That there is a place where she can talk, and I tend to, it's good to leave that alone and let that happen, and not try and control it or get sort of helicopter that relationship. And you can see that really working. The older siblings within a blended family can really help out in helping the younger ones through whatever they're feeling.
Jason, thank you. Jason Watkins, BAFTA award-winning actor, who's with us, actor, singer, presenter, Denise Van Outen as well. School running. We've just been talking about blended families. If there are observations, questions around that, 85058, that is the text number to get in contact with us. We're also going to be talking about weighing kids when they go back to school. What do you think of that as an idea, to see how much weight they have put on or potentially lost during lockdown? Right, 37 minutes past 1, which is late even by my standards of tardiness of going to the news. So my huge apologies to Alison Acton, who is now here with the headlines.
On digital, BBC Sounds, smart speaker and online.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
Major incident has been declared after a passenger train derailed in Aberdeenshire. Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has described it as an extremely serious incident and told Scottish Parliament that there are early reports of serious injuries. The Aberdeen to Glasgow service came off the tracks close to Stonehaven just before 10 this morning. The area was affected by heavy rain and flooding overnight, and it's thought it may have been caused by a landslip. Boris Johnson has thanked the emergency services and says his thoughts are with those affected. In other news, the government's denied that the exam system in England has been thrown into confusion following last-minute changes to the way A-level and GCSE grades will be assessed. Schools will be able to use the results of mock tests to appeal on behalf of their pupils if they're unhappy with their grades. And the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, says the country is facing hard times and that many more people will lose their jobs in the coming months. It comes after official figures show the British economy shrank by more than 20% between April and June. That's the latest news this day with the sport.
This weekend's Super League matches involving Hull FC and Salford have been called off after 6 Hull players tested positive for COVID-19 following their match with Salford at the weekend. All Salford players have tested negative, but 11 of them now need to self-isolate after having prolonged contact with infected Hull players. Here's the Hull FC boss, Adam Pearson.
Going through all the track and trace process and taking things as detailed and as intensively as we can to try to make sure it doesn't spread any further. I mean, that's obviously the most important thing now. They're fit young boys. It's not so much the players. I think the players will be fine. It's obviously you worry about the people in and around them in their families, really.
It means Castleford, who were due to play Hull, will now face St Helens, while Catalan, who were due to play Salford, will now play Wakefield. It's emerged Netherlands women's manager Sarina Wiegman is the Football Association's preferred choice to take over from Phil Neville as England women's head coach. European Championship and last year's World Cup final. Meanwhile, the former SFA Chief Executive Gordon Smith has suggested any further breaches of coronavirus protocols could result in points deductions. Celtic and Aberdeen have had their next 2 Premiership matches postponed after players broke lockdown rules. Former Celtic player Stilian Petrov has told us that players will now know there's no room for error.
It's just a yellow card and then it's going to be a red card. But now players will be more switched on. Players now will know they can't take any more risks and they have to follow the guidelines. And it's about self-responsibility. And you have to stand up and be a great example.
The semi-finals are underway today at the World Snooker Championship in Sheffield. First up at the table is Anthony McGill against Kyron Wilson. Jamie Bolton is watching the early stages of the Crucible.
And we're down to the one table set up here. An opportunity certainly knocks for Kyron Wilson and Anthony McGill to reach the final for the first time. Wilson impressed yesterday as he knocked out the defending champion Judd Trump, while McGill beat Kurt Mafflin to get to the semi-finals for the first time. And it's McGill who's made a fast start this afternoon. He took the opening frame with a break of 83. He's back at the table again on a a break of 78 and about to go 2-0 up. Later today, two Crucible legends go head-to-head as the 5-time champion Ronnie O'Sullivan faces the 3-time winner Mark Selby. 17 is the target for victory.
Coverage continues on BBC Two and the BBC Sport website. Now, 40% of elite British sportswomen surveyed by the BBC say they're not comfortable talking to coaches about their periods, while more than half said it affects their performance. This country can learn a lot from the US women's football team. That's according to Northern Ireland and Charlton defender Rachel Newborough, who's told 5 Live they used innovative period tracking in the run-up.
When they weren't on their periods, they could increase the load because you can push yourself to a higher capacity. And when they're at their most vulnerable on their period or the lead up, whatever it is in their personal case, they would lower the load to make sure that they adapted to what the player needed. And at the moment, especially in the UK in my sport, we don't have any awareness around that.
The best live sport.
Europe's elite club competition.
The Champions League. After a commanding performance against Real Madrid, Manchester City are in the quarter-finals of the Champions League. On Saturday night, with an 8 o'clock kickoff from Lisbon, it's Manchester City versus Lyon. This is 5 Live.
Across the UK.
This is BBC 5 Live. Nahal Arthanaika.
So is school running something that we do in the first hour of the show every Wednesday? If you are a parent, then this is about you and your life and your kids' lives, whether they be 2 years old or 22 years old. The actor, singer and presenter Denise Van Outen is here. She's got a 10-year-old, Betsy. And BAFTA award-winning actor Jason Watkins. He's going to be starring in the upcoming drama Des, which will air on ITV in September. That's alongside David Tennant, who, of course, by a weird coincidence, was on the show yesterday talking about his podcast. Jason is dad to Freddie, 24, Pip, 22, Bessie, 13, and Gilbert, who is 8. Can you tell us a little bit about Des, Jason? What does the ITV press office allow you to say it?
Yeah, well, it's 3-part drama. And Dave Tennant rather brilliantly plays Dennis Nilsson. Des is what he liked people to call him. Oh, call me Des, in a very kind of casual way. And it charts the terrible case of in the late 1970s, early 80s, where Dennis Nilsson picked up young men, vulnerable young men, and took them back and murdered them, and then kept them in various ways within his flat. And there were 15 murders. And the story really charts the growing horror of the investigation as Dennis Nilsson admits to these series of murders. And Danny Mays plays the chief inspector who is leading that case, and his horror at what he's hearing. And it rather brilliantly shows that through to trial, etc. But as I play a guy called Brian Masters, who wrote a rather seminal crime book called Killing for Company, where he was able to gain access to Nilsson and interview him for a book. He's a biographer. And so while there was this parallel investigation going on, where obviously Danny Mays' brilliant portrayal as Chief Inspector J is trying to get information for prosecution, and my character is trying to find out why he did it and what his motives were and what his upbringing was like, and kind of trying to comprehend how he came to act in the way he did. I mean, it's a horrific tale, but the story isn't about the salaciousness of those murders. It's about what makes somebody do those sort of things. It's really exceptional. Both Danny and Dave are just extraordinary in the roles.
And I'm sure they would say the same thing about you.
Well, I'd pay them quite a lot of money to do that.
Possibly not while wearing your swimming trunks, though.
Yes,
that's a little bit too much.
Yeah.
For anyone. Okay, let's get back into school runnings. We're talking about older and younger children, because both of you have families with young adults in their early 20s, also younger children. And of course, those people in their early 20s considered one of those groups that have been the most affected by the pandemic and its knock-on effects. I mean, if you're 10 years old, Denise, I guess your world is a lot smaller than if you're in your 20s, isn't it? So
Absolutely.
You can entertain someone who's 10 a bit more than you can someone in their 20s, because they've lost so much, haven't they?
Do you know, I do feel really sad for Eddie's daughter turned 21 in lockdown, and she was just stuck with the two of us. It was on the weekend that my daughter went to stay with her dad because she was able to still continue to see her dad throughout the lockdown. And I just felt so sorry for her. She'd split up with her boyfriend before lockdown. Nothing to do with the lockdown, and she just ended up sitting there. I just thought she looks like she's going to burst into tears at any moment. I just thought it must be so awful. Because when I think back to like my early 20s, or even my 21st birthday, I was out in London. I went to a club, had all my girlfriends there.
What was the club?
I just thought, you poor thing. I went to a place in Holborn, I think. I think it was called Villa Stefano.
Wow.
It used to be called. It was a really fun club. I lost my shoes. That's how good the night was.
Whoa.
I'd got a new pair of shoes that I bought for my birthday.
That is a big night.
And lost my shoes. I think I put them down because my feet were hurting, and somebody came along and just swiped them. So I lost my new birthday shoes. But I just felt sorry for Leah. And you know, we did everything that we possibly could to try and make it fun for her. But it's not the same. You know, she's got a great group of girlfriends. We have been able to make up for it since. We did do a barbecue 2 weeks ago in the garden. A socially distanced barbecue for a handful of her girlfriends, and she loved it. Because I promised her, and I said, I promise you, when we can and when it's allowed, we'll do something in the garden if the weather's good. But it's awful because she said to me, she sat there, she said, what am I going to do? Even if this carries on, you know, and I want to go on a date, I'm going to have to wear a mask. You know, how do you meet people? Yeah. You know, it was hard enough before.
Yeah.
But you have the added problem now, obviously now with dating, it's very much, a lot of it starts online, doesn't it, with people talking through social media. But it's not as if you can actually go and meet the person and go somewhere and have a normal date. She did go on a walk with someone, with a guy she'd known for years, a friend of hers, but it was a socially distanced walk, and I was like, sounds romantic. She went, well, it was just a bit rubbish, really. Because you can't really have a lot of fun, can you, when you just go for a country walk?
No. It's not like being in the back of a Renault 5 GT Turbo in a Burger King car park.
Now you're talking.
I mean, come on.
Now you've got me going. The Essex in me has come out.
Listen, the Essex in me. The Essex in me as well. Harlow Town, come on.
I had an XR2 actually.
Oh, look at you. Yes,
that's a little bit of Essex in me.
XR2. Come on, Jason. Your eldest is, people are reminiscing now over those cars, proper cars. I thought the Renault 5 GT Turbo was like a Ferrari for me when I was looking at this car, thinking, oh my gosh, I shall never own such a thing of beauty. Anyway, Jason, your eldest, I mean, the timing is terrible because he's, of course, kind of entering into the world now of career, thinking about what he wants to do. I mean, how worried are you of him entering this market? I mean, look, today we've been told that we are now in recession, and it's the deepest contraction of the UK economy ever.
It's pretty grim, isn't it? I mean, it's a difficult prospect under normal circumstances to leave, try and find work as a graduate, and I mean, it's a lot about keeping faith and keeping confidence, isn't it? I mean, giving them as much confidence as you can. And,
is he going to go into the secure and steady word of acting?
Well, he's been acting.
He's incredibly steady.
Yeah, I mean, he's been acting already. I mean, he's been doing stuff. You know, he's done Casualty and Doctors and stuff. You know, while he was at university, and in his gap years preceding university, he'd been doing some acting. And I think he really wants to do that, but he's also academically very clever. So that's the avenue that he's pursuing. So he does have a kind of armory of skills, and it's a way of finding the right thing. And I think, you know, if you're trained to be a barrister, for example, right, that's what you're going to do, and it's quite a linear journey. But when you're kind of open and you're not quite sure where you fit and what you want to do, you're looking for, you know, something to stimulate you to take you somewhere, or even by chance, you know. But of course, there's not that much choice around, I suppose. I mean, less jobs, so it's going to be a real struggle. And I suppose we just have to keep him buoyant and confident. And he's very, you know, he's resilient, and I'm sure he'll find his feet and find what he wants to do. So it is going to be difficult for a lot of people. At least, you know, we're able to support him in a way, you know, emotionally. My wife Clara has just been brilliant at helping both of my sons from my first marriage through what they go through, and so she's been great in helping and advising him. So yeah, it's going to be tough.
God. Like between Betsy and Eddie's two, Does she see them as kind of as people that she can talk to without the kind of judgment she'll get from you, Denise?
Definitely. I definitely think so with Leah. I mean, Betsy's 10, but she's at an age where she's very curious about a lot of things.
Yes.
So she does have conversations with Leah. And what's actually really nice as well is Leah's, I can see that she chooses her words very carefully in what she talks about in front of Betsy, which is really nice.
Yeah.
You know, even with the whole boyfriend situation, like Betsy understood that she'd split up with her boyfriend, and Leah had sort of every right to be cursing him in front of Betsy, but she was very much like, you know, sometimes if things just don't work out, it's better to walk away, and being very diplomatic about the whole thing. But obviously when the door closed, it was just the two of us. She was like, oh, I hate him. You know, but it was, so she's careful about what she says. But it is nice because I do think she, like I said, I really like her a lot. She's such a lovely lady, but I think that she will be definitely the person that Betsy will be able to talk to and feel comfortable speaking to her about things, you know, especially as she starts to get older and gets into her teen years, which of course, you know, are very the difficult years.
How I mean, interesting if as they get into the teen years, and if you and Betsy fall out, as inevitably you will for a little while, it may be an hour or so.
We already do, and she's 10.
Well, listen, trust me, my daughter's 11. Yeah, exactly. My daughter's 11, and her and my wife, yes, definitely that happens. Are you comfortable with Eddie's daughter being that person that Betsy can go to and moan about you?
Yes, absolutely. I think it's important. She is an only child, and she does view them as a step sister and step brother. So she would definitely, you know, I'd happily let her go and speak to Leah, and they can have a moan about me if they want to.
Right. And Jason, what's the kind of relationship like then between your two youngest and your two eldest? Do they see them very much as kind of mentors, people that can give advice?
You know, the older siblings can be a sort of go-to for for help and advice and stuff like that. And also, just it's great seeing them sort of play together and have fun. I mean, you know, Pip is he's at art school in Manchester, and he's sort of does video art, and he has a green screen with him. So they were. Gilbert was they wrote and made a film together, you know, over a few hours in front of the green screen. Everybody sort of joined in, you know. So that's wonderful when the family is linked in that way, and that they are a sort of a role model, and it can take the heat off you in a way. That intensity of being a parent, sometimes it's nice to have an outlet and let somebody else lead, and you know, and it's the same for Clara, my wife. You know, she's taken on, you know, that weren't her children, obviously, when we got together, and she's just been brilliant in just being a huge part of their lives. And just mentioning about our Bessie, you know, Clara's she's a dressmaker, and she's an actress as well, but also a dressmaker. And it's interesting that Bessie's now making her own dresses, you know, without being prescribed or told to do that, or necessarily encouraged them anyway. That's what she's chosen to pick up. And it's when we talk about role models, it's often they kind of instinctively go towards things that you don't necessarily push them towards. You know, they will find their way. So in a way, I think as a parent, it's showing them as many possibilities as possible and letting them latch onto one, and then support them as much as you can.
We had this text come in saying, I split up when my boys were 9 and 6 years old 9 years ago. Their dad got remarried and having their first baby later this year. We all took everything sensibly, have the kids 1 week, always put kids first, at least in my care. Recently, my oldest son, 18, told me, at least the new baby will have a better life than I had. It broke my heart. Then he and his dad had a big argument, and he left his dad's house, told him the same thing as well, which made his dad so angry and upset. Although we thought we had been very careful about how the kids feel about parents splitting and moving on to the new relationship, it was beyond my guess how they felt damaged. Bad memories are stronger than campaigners have criticised the idea, saying that it would be detrimental to children's mental health and could trigger eating disorders. Jason, what do you think of this idea?
Well, I'm rather sort of distressed by it. I have to say, raised this yesterday. I was talking to a researcher, and I don't see the benefit of, humiliating or shaming a child in a school environment. I mean, I don't see how that's going to help at all. I mean, we want positive things. I mean, my Clara walks every morning, walks the dog, and has a very sort of physical life. I'm a mad cyclist during lockdown, and it's the sort of, I'd rather, Gilbert see me get on my bike at 6 in the morning. He's always up at 5:30, by the way.
That's outrageous. How did that happen?
It's a killer. But for me, watching your parents or somebody, you're talking about role models, cycling off and coming back, and that's a way of saying, well, exercise is something that is important, and it is about diet and exercise. It's not about saying someone is overweight and shaming them and stinging them into feeling that they've got to desperately then go and start, manically trying to lose the weight. It's about setting a positive agenda for them. I'm confused that is the best way of doing it. It clearly isn't. And there's been recent government initiatives about dieting with children and several other campaigns. And they're the things that we should be looking at, I think, helping our kids to eat healthily. And it's very hard with younger children who like those things that are fattening sweets and ice cream and burgers, etc. And it's a way of, one of the breakthroughs in lockdown is that Gilbert now eats avocados. I mean, that's all joy, because that covers everything, and he's managed to do that. So, job done as a parent.
Was that you or Clara that introduced the avocado?
I think it's Clara. Clara's a far better cook, a better person, better parent all round, and certainly a better cook. And so, but he's sort of likes them. I think, oh, right, here we go. So I think that's the way forward. And I'm not, although I haven't read the actual article, but I think weighing kids is just not the way.
Denise, your thoughts on this?
I'm outraged by the idea that you would weigh a child at school. I grew up in a world, I've danced since I was 7 years old. I did a lot of dancing when I was a child, and I auditioned for a very, very well-known ballet school. And I remember to go for my audition, you had to be weighed. And I've got a very healthy approach to food and exercise and diet. I've never actually done a diet as such. I've always exercised and ate well. But my mum was shocked when they weighed me, and I grew up in a world of dance with lots of friends. Two of my friends actually went to that ballet school, and I've grown up with friends with eating disorders, and it all stems from childhood. It could be one comment from another child. Just a teacher or weighing a child at school would cause so many issues with kids and their mental health. I think it's wrong. I think the way to do it, obviously with the lockdown, some of us have been lazy. I had about 3 weeks in lockdown where I wasn't really doing much exercise because I just thought it was Christmas for me. Yeah. I was a bit like, this is nice, I don't have to go to work, just chill out for a little bit. And then I thought, I can't do this any longer because I actually do really enjoy exercise. And I got my daughter moving, and we did a lot of bike rides, and we set up an assault course in our garden just to do some fun things. But I think it's about re-educating, teaching parents about how to cook. In a way, I'd love Jamie Oliver now to come back and restart the campaign that he started a few years ago about teaching children about healthy eating and the parents. And I know he struggled really hard to get it into schools, but I think now more than ever would be a great time.
Denise, thank you very much. We seem to have lost Denise there. Denise Van Houten, thank you very much indeed for being part of School Runnings today. Jason Watkins, thank you to you as well for being part of School Runnings. I've got some text to read out as well here. This one says, 45 years ago, my teacher used to weigh me in front of the class. I was a tubby child, 8-year-old. That was fun. Not, says Andy from Wigan. Who thinks that's a good idea? You in the year groups, perhaps. Okay, thank you for your text. Thank you, Denise and Jason. Coming up, we have the multi-Oscar winning director and writer, Oliver Stone, on this very show. Stick around.
On digital, BBC Sounds, smart speaker and online.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
BBC News at 2 o'clock. This is Justine Green. A passenger train has derailed near Stonehaven in Aberdeenshire, with some people reported to have been seriously injured. Emergency crews were called out shortly before 10 o'clock this morning. It's thought a landslip may have caused the derailment after heavy rain. Tony Miles from Modern Railway magazine says the train involved was the 6:38 service from Aberdeen to Glasgow.
It called at Stonehaven as normal. Carried on through Carmont, where the driver spotted landslip. So he was advised to, it appears, to take the train back to Stonehaven so passengers could be taken off, and it appears the train hit a second landslip on its way back to Stonehaven.
The Chancellor Rishi Sunak has warned that the UK faces hard times after data confirmed that the country had slumped into recession because of the coronavirus lockdown. The Office for National Statistics said the economy shrank by more than 20% between April and June compared with the first 3 months of the year. Labour has described the government's handling of exam results in England as a complete fiasco after it was announced that schools could use mock grades to appeal if pupils are not happy with what's been allocated. A-level results are due to be published tomorrow. Ministers have insisted the alteration will ensure pupils are not disadvantaged. Bill Watkin, the chief executive of the Sixth Form Colleges Association, says the last-minute change has confused what was a simple system.
When we started this whole exercise of working out what we'd do back in March, we said, let's rely on the teacher's professional judgment. And the centre assessment grade is exactly that. It's the teacher's professional judgment. But it's no good just saying let's rely on the teacher's professional judgment for some students.
The Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden and his new running mate Kamala Harris are due to make their first joint appearance at an event in Delaware later today. Mr. Biden said he had chosen the California senator to be his candidate for vice president because she's fearless. Hundreds of people across Sussex have been without mains water for 5 days. A burst pipe has left several towns and villages with low pressure or intermittent supplies, as Nicola Morrison reports.
South East Water customers in Rotherfield, Crowborough, Mayfield, Hadlow Down and Five Ashes have been having problems with their water supplies since the end of last week. Yesterday, the company said the water has been restored to some homes and that the problem was caused by increased demand, partially due to the hot weather and more people at home. The unstable supply during the heatwave has left many residents furious. South East Water has been providing bottled water to those affected. It says it's working to get people's supplies reconnected this afternoon.
The Football Association is in negotiations with the Netherlands manager Sarina Wiegman to succeed Phil Neville as head coach of the England women's team. One sticking point is said to be whether she takes control of the Great Britain team at next year's Tokyo Olympics. That's the BBC News at 2 minutes.
Escape with a podcast this summer on BBC Sounds. Dive back into the music of 2016 with James Acaster's Perfect Sounds. That's me, by the way. See what the UK has to offer with Zing in United Zingdom. And experience the highs and lows of family life on the Go Ask Your Mother podcast.
What are you eating?
Make your destination BBC Sounds this summer. Download the app to escape.
First for news and the best live sport. This is BBC 5 Live. Nahal Arthanaika.
Now, coming up, the legendary film director Oliver Stone. But as I said, we will be keeping you updated throughout the programme about the derailed passenger train in Aberdeenshire. Emergency services are at the scene in Stonehaven. Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon says there are reports of serious injuries. Our transport correspondent is Tom Burridge and joins me now. Thank you for joining us, Tom. What do we know so far?
Well, we know this was the 6:38 service from Aberdeen to Glasgow. We know that the train derailed in a very remote area. It seems to be in a valley outside the town of Stonehaven. And everything at the moment is indicating that heavy rain in that area in the hours before the crash potentially caused a landslide, and that seems, although we haven't confirmed this obviously at this early stage, it seems that everything is pointing in that direction, that there was a landslip or a landslide, and that pushed the train off the tracks.
An hour ago I spoke to BBC Radio Scotland reporter David Shanks and asked him if at that point an hour ago we knew how many passengers were on board. Do we have any more clarification as to that now, Tom?
I have asked that question to people within the rail industry I'm talking to about this. They did not have that information when I last spoke to them, which was pretty recently. I think, like, you know, at the moment, the railways, the number of people generally using the railways is sporadic. So people using the railway to get to railways in the UK at the moment to get to work is very, very low. Leisure travel can be quite high in places at certain times, but remember, Aberdeen is still in a local lockdown, so you'd imagine that would be a factor too. But at the moment, we don't know how many people, how many passengers were on board. What we do know is that this was an HST train, a high-speed train, ScotRail service. It had 2 locomotives at the front and at the back, so one at the back, one at the front. That locomotives, basically where the engine of the train is, and then in the middle, 4 passenger carriages. And I'm told that 3 of those passenger carriages and the front locomotive derailed and are sitting on an embankment below the track, and the 4th passenger carriage and the back locomotive are still on the track. And if you have seen any images on social media or on the TV, you'll get a going out of the valley below where the train derailed. The emergency services are up in this field area. A lot of ambulances, helicopters are being used. I think everything points towards a fairly complicated rescue and recovery operation at this stage. And an investigation by the Rail Accident Investigation Branch has already been launched. That's a matter, of course, as soon as there's a major incident anywhere on the railways, they launch an investigation. Their inspectors will probably be arriving at the scene around about now, and they will be carrying out a very meticulous investigation alongside any police or fire or ambulance work, recovery and rescue work or investigation work that they're doing. There'll be this Rail Accident Investigation Branch investigation. It'll be meticulous, and their job will be to establish exactly what caused the crash and what happened.
Tom, thank you. That's our transport correspondent, Tom Burridge. And as I said an hour ago, I shall repeat that we will bring you as much information as we have when we get it. We shall do our very best to pass it on to you as quickly as possible about this derailment that has taken place in a place called Stonehaven in Aberdeenshire in Scotland. OK, it's 7 minutes past 2. Coming up, we're going to have Alex Edelman on the show. He's the comedian, really, really funny guy. And we're going to be talking about the fact that he has released the comedy Record. Yeah. Remember those? No, neither do I. But it's happening. But before that, Oliver Stone, screenwriter, novelist, producer, and one of, when it first came out, a new wave of author-directors that and writers that emerged in Hollywood in the 1970s. He is, of course, outspoken, controversial, a man not afraid to share what some believe to be conspiracy theories, or indeed challenge accepted intellectual opinions. He's also someone who's battled addiction, and whose worldview has been, at least in part, shaped by brutal first-hand experiences of being a young soldier, an infantryman in the Vietnam War. His new memoir, Chasing the Light, How I Fought My Way into Hollywood from the 1960s to Platoon, covers his childhood, his time in Vietnam, and his rise as a writer and filmmaker in the 1970s and 80s. So, last night, I sat down with him via video link and talked about that part of his life, and in particular about the first in his critically acclaimed trilogy of films about Vietnam, Platoon.
In 1967, Oliver Stone was a combat infantryman in Vietnam. During his tour, he received a Bronze Star for gallantry. 10 years later, in Hollywood, he was picking up an Oscar for the screenplay of Midnight Express. Now he has another story to tell, a movie that grew out of his own experience. Stone has come a long way from Vietnam, but he has not left it behind. The first real casualty of war is innocence. The first real movie about the war in Vietnam is Platoon.
What for you is the thing you love most about the film industry?
I wish you'd use the word film, not industry.
But it is an industry. You can't get away from that.
Well, you raised a tough point. I mean, I love writing. I love the act of making a movie. I love the art of editing. I enjoy the directing process. I like taking a film through from beginning to end. I'm a writer, director, editor. And the worst part of it for me is the end, when you have to go out there and talk about it and, and release it. And you have to make it sound fresh 100 times over. So by that time, generally speaking, you're exhausted by the whole process. So, it's a tough thing to sell a movie, but I love making them.
What of your experiences in Vietnam equipped you to deal with Hollywood?
Survival, a sense of survival and being smart, staying alert. I put a lot of what I learned over there into my movie making, in the sense that being 360 degrees alert, alive, the 6 inches in front of your face. You have to see well in the jungle. You have to see well when you look through a camera. I take the attitude of a soldier, that it's a 360 degree field. Everything is up for grabs. Everything can go wrong. Everything sometimes does go wrong. Film is very much sometimes an accidental event, and because you're doing it, you're exposing live actors, live situations, although it's all scripted and you think it's going to go according to some kind of schedule. It doesn't work that way. You're often chasing the light. You're trying to get that last shot of the day when the light is going down, and it's the most important shot, and you have to get it, or you have to get 2 shots, and you have to decide which of the 2 shots you want to have, because you don't have time to get both. Those kind of instant decisions.
You say in the book that certainly a piece of you died or was murdered in Vietnam. Was anything that you lost there resurrected by the success that you had in life?
You're asking these questions like a psychologist, so I don't want to answer superficially. What I lost in Vietnam was who I was before. I say at one point in the book that all of us came out of the war stained, darkened by it. We were all part of it, at least those of us in combat. I suppose the non-combat troops had a different attitude. I felt like anybody out there in the field interacting with the villagers, the civilians, and the enemy saw something or experienced something that compromised their previous feelings forever. And it isn't that easy to get over with. You come back into the world and everyone else is functioning, making money, carrying on like there's no war. They're indifferent to it. Remember, that war was, although it was supposed to be everybody in a democracy, it's only basically the lower classes went. And it was not, most of the young people my age skipped it. So there was a divide in our generation when we came back. I think your original question was, did I ever get anything back?
Yes.
No, not really. I'm still divorced from my generation. I feel like I'm an outsider to many things in this so-called business you mentioned of Hollywood. I don't feel like I belong. I think for myself, I am who I am, and I've done what I've done independently for most of my existence. It's been tough too.
When I was reading the book, I wondered, because I interview so many people who often say to me, Oliver, that they wouldn't change a thing about their life because it's made them who they are. But I was wondering if there were things that you could quite easily erase from your past.
That's called regret. You're a human being. If you don't have regret, I don't know if you're really fully a human being. Of course. I mean, so many mistakes, so many things you could have handled differently. And I think as you get more mature, you notice you know more about yourself and you know more about how to handle situations. Of course, dozens of times in this film business have I done things I regret.
But you decide to go to Vietnam to find some kind of meaning?
Yes, if there was a meaning, I had reached a place at 19, like many young people, when I wrote a book called A Child's Night Dream. Was published in 1997. It was a point of view of a 19-year-old, very young, but honest. And when that book was rejected at the time, I was hurt. I didn't know what my meaning was. I didn't know what my purpose was. I believed in God, and I didn't see any evidence of him, and I just didn't know what to do. And I didn't want to go to school. I didn't want to continue at Yale University in the East Coast kind of mentality my father wanted me to be. So my parents being suddenly had an effect on me because we were no longer a family. I had no brothers or sisters. I really had no home, and I thought this would be the best way to go over there and see if I could survive it. And if it was meant for me to survive, I'd have a meaning in life, which I'd find out. I put that at the end of Platoon, my feelings at the end of that war.
What did you discover about yourself in the process of writing this book? And specifically, we're talking about your parents, who they were, their relationship.
I discovered enormous issues I delved into. When you write a book, you stop, you reappreciate your life, you weigh things that you never thought about, because in this business you're rushing from film to film often, and you don't have time to stop or to think. It's a vortex. Both of them were very strong, and both of them were so different. They didn't belong together, and I make that point clearly in the early chapters of the book, that it was a romantic affair. They met during World War II in Paris. He was a soldier, and it was a romantic affair. But like The Gone with the Wind, a movie which a book that my mother loved so much, it didn't work out for Scarlett O'Hara and Rhett Butler. It did not work out. The beauty of Gone with the Wind is it doesn't work. It's an unrequited love story, and that's what happens. And when that happened, it shocked me, because I always thought that they belonged together. The first 15 years of my life was based on that feeling of trust. That was shattered, and I think a lot of children of divorce feel the same way. They never trust again. It's very hard for them to trust, to find love again. So reality is loneliness. I'm talking to a lot of other people, and I think that hit me hard. But going back and writing the book gave me peace, because I understood what love meant. I had the marriages to think about, what love is, what family means. The role of my French grandmother in this book is great. It's important. She dies when I'm 30, and it sets off a whole new wave of thought and seriousness in my life. So at the age of 30, I'm broke and depressed. At the age of 40, I'm on top of the movie world. So it shows, it's about those transitions, those things that go on inside the person that make him change. And sometimes it's just an inch or two, it's not a big margin. So a lot of these events are happening, from Vietnam to my parents' contradiction, to this contradiction of the lying that was going on in Vietnam, the big lie of Vietnam. The stories that the American government told us about this war were all lies from the beginning. The issue of, there's so many other issues. Nihal, you read the book, so you bring them up. There's a lot of pain in the book.
I was wondering when reading the book, what does it take for you to trust someone?
Time. Takes time. I'm not much more aware of betrayal. There's a lot of betrayal in life. People smile, but they don't mean it. People make deals, but they don't mean it. People vow to be in business with you and so forth and so on, and they break their vows. It happens, and that's life. I'm not complaining. I've had relative success in the world. I just see it a lot more difficult, with much more difficulty than I did when I was younger, when I was a little bit more naive and believing.
But your mother, Jacqueline Stone, did instill in you a fundamental sense of optimism.
Yes, thank God. No, my dad was more from the dark side, and I loved him, but he was funny, but he was sarcastic. And Mom was the opposite. She was optimist beyond belief, loving, very loving, and always so many friends. That was the only problem. She had so many friends. She would befriend the world. She'd adopt every dog in the pound. It's difficult to be the son of a mother like that, but she was quite a woman, magnetic. But And she instilled in me that optimism from the beginning. But it wasn't based on reality either. So when the divorce happened, I saw the other side of the story. Let's say that she was spending a fortune. My father was broke after the divorce, and frankly, he never recovered. I mean, it was a big blow to him, the destruction of that marriage. She took a lover, he took lovers. I mean, there were all kinds of stories going back to the 1940s and 50s.
How did you eventually overcome his rejection of you in the sense of what you would achieve in life? So you mentioned that a number of times in the book, that kind of rejection that you felt from him.
I think it's approval. My father was a very honest man, and I admire him for that. He wasn't a BS artist. He wasn't going to give me false compliments because he felt my mother was over-complimenting me. You understand? It's that phenomenon that exists between them. One parent feels that the other parent is indulging the child too much, so he would try to counterbalance that because he thought my mother, who he thought was a wonderful mother, but he thought she was creating illusions in me. It was just because she was French. He felt she was a bit of a show-off, and she was. She believed in having status parties in New York City and spent a lot of money building up that profile, which he didn't believe in. He was a hard worker and more biblical in that sense, Jewish biblical in the sense of, although he was not a practicing Jew, he in fact had contempt for the Jewish way of life, but at the same time he had that fundamentally instilled in him, a sense of fear, a sense of hard work, a sense that no one's getting out of here alive. Life's no bowl of cherries, or stories that he used to tell me all the time, but you can see the dark side comes out in his stories that he tells me about, among many other things, the politics of the world.
Did he feel that he was stealing you for the world, and stealing as in S-T-E-E-L?
I do think most fathers feel that way, that they have to raise their children to steal them. Yes, I feel that that's it. Certainly is true, because he had quite a shock when he came out of. He went to Yale with actually all the children, brothers, sisters went to Ivy League colleges, and in the 1920s, and he came out of school in 1931, which was the pit of the Depression. So when he came out of Yale University, he couldn't get a job, and it took a lot of struggle. He was shocked. His father lost all his money in the Depression, you see. So when those shocks happen to you, I suppose early in your life like that, just as you're coming of age, it's doubly stressful. So he never borrowed too much. He always tried to live within his means. He kept modest, and that was the opposite of what my mother was gunning for. I'd make a movie about those two.
Yeah, right. I mean, you're right. To Dad, I was the idiot son who'd never amount to much. That's quite a horrific burden to carry.
There's a lot of horrific burdens we carry, but certainly the competitive system I grew up in, the schools, the institutions, summer camps, they're all geared to that. That was the way of life. It was the Germanic model of kindergarten or camp, summer camp. So, it was all pretty competitive, and that's what I revolted against when I was 18, 19. I couldn't take it anymore. I just didn't want to compete. I didn't care. It wasn't me. I didn't know who I was. That's why I wrote the book, to find out who is this person I'm in, this body I'm in. I'm not a guy who's going to be worried about trying to get a job on Wall Street, trying to make a living, all this stuff, It just drives me crazy. So I became a true rebel. Just threw it all over. Wandered around. I went to Asia. At 19, I went for the first time, and I taught school in Chiang, Vietnam. 2 terms I did. I quit. Traveled all over Asia, Laos, Cambodia, tried to get into China, but couldn't. Then I went into the Merchant Marine. I sailed as a wiper, which is the lowliest job on this ship, blowing the tubes and cleaning the toilets, the boiler. Anyway, that was my. I just wanted to get away from what I did, you see. But that was a long journey. It didn't end there. It went through the war, too. I went back and back and back. So it was a journey of many years away from my previous life. I compared it to the Odyssey.
Yes, Odysseus comes up a lot. It's such a strange paradox that a man or a young man who has so many issues with authority ends up going into the most rigid authority, to go into the army.
Yeah, exactly. But that's what I had to do. I had to go to the bottom of the barrel. What am I running from? Or if you're going to talk about authoritarian, let's go there. Let's go to the war situation and let's see what it's all about. Let me find out about the reality of life, because I didn't know what it was. And as you can see from the book, I had my problems in the Army. I mean, if anything, I rejected authority. I fought with what I call the Master Sergeant class. They run the Army, in my opinion. In England, you have something like that, or used to. But they were really the people I dealt with at that level, because I was just a private. I didn't want to be an officer. God, I didn't want to be an officer. I wanted just to get in and out and do my duty and be anonymous. So that's what I did. And I didn't complain. I mean, I fought with them about many regulations and what I considered minor, petty stuff. But when it came to the actual side of combat, I didn't complain about what they wanted me to do. I just did it, and I was fatalistic about it. I was wounded twice. I think you know that, I saw quite a bit of action, but I didn't complain about it.
When you're in the midst of men who are losing their humanity and committing essentially war crimes, how do you prevent yourself from being drawn into that poison?
Well, that's a key question, isn't it? And it's certainly one that I try to answer in the book. It's at the heart of Platoon. If you remember Platoon.
Yeah, Barnes and Ellis, right?
Yes.
The darkness.
The two sergeants in the platoon both are leaders of men, and one of them is the top dog, alpha dog, and he commits a war crime. To him, it's justified, and we show the circumstances. I mean, it wasn't wanted. We weren't doing this openly. It was just something that happened here and there and there, and then eventually, after a certain time, it happens more and more. But we really didn't respect the Vietnamese civilians at all. Most of us did, and we trashed their villages because we thought they were cooperating with the enemy. So in the movie, yes, I brought it to a head as a dramatic head, and for movie purposes, I brought it to this head between two sergeants. Then one sergeant charges the other with war crimes, and the sergeant who's charged, Barnes, kills Elias under cover of a battle. Basically committing friendly fire, killing him murdering him. It's a homicide, and gets away with it. And that sets up the conclusion of the film, which is, what's the young man going to do about it, because he knows it happened. And you raise the point of, how do you not get involved? You do get involved. You become involved. You may not be the worst of the lot, but you still are involved. And that's why I had that rather dark ending of Platoon, if you remember, where Charlie Sheen shoots the sergeant, kills him in cold blood. I didn't want to euphemize this war, because on movies, we know what movies do about war. They're just not hard enough. And especially since the 2001, American movies have gone insanely super patriotic. I'm telling the truth here. This was a dirty, dirty, dirty war. Every one of us was stained, and that includes, I believe, the American civilian who was paying his taxes, supporting that war and not protesting. And I fall into that category. I didn't protest the war until later in time. Basically, I was neutral. I didn't want to get into trouble. You know what I'm saying? We're all conformists that way. We don't want to speak out.
But how easy is it for someone who is ostensibly whatever normal is, but a normal human being, but in a situation where they can get away with things and there'll be no ramifications for that?
That's a very interesting question, because I saw that happen. It does happen. There's people in that situation who are not educated. They're just people who are racist. Some of them had loved the power of the gun. They loved the power they had over other people. Civilians are easy targets because you can't find the enemy that easily. They don't submit to you can't walk in on them. So they take it out on civilians. It was awful, some of that stuff I saw. Yeah, it's easy. It's easy to be an uneducated young person who has no moral sense, put a gun in his hand, he's 18 years old. Why not? Hey, I can get away with it. The more military types will say, well, that's ridiculous. Regulated than that. No, it isn't. Because when you get out into the jungle hides everything. And you don't see officers. And that's a whole big point I made. I had my fights at that time when we came out with officers. Well, your outfit must have been some shabby outfit. No, it wasn't. We were simply in the reality of a situation where officers were not available. They were not around. And if they were, who knows if they had any authority, because the sergeants had the authority. And the sergeants couldn't always be there. So a lot of stuff happened away from the official eye, so to speak. And there was a freedom in the bush, too, at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Pentagon objected, didn't they? And they didn't want to have anything to do with Platoon, did they?
Yeah, but, at the same time, the Pentagon issued a report in 1971, which likened the Vietnam situation, the morale of the troops over there, to the French army of 1917 when they were undergoing their mutinies. That was covered in Humphrey Cobb's novel that Kubrick did, Paths of Glory. Well, that was a real problem, because after 1969, basically, when Johnson and pulled out, Lyndon Johnson, 68 really, they knew that we had no intention of really fighting this war, winning it, that we were pulling out, and there was no reason to give your life, no reason at all. So there was who's going to be the last American to die. It became a call for Vietnamization of the war, which is a euphemism for letting the Vietnamese fight, which is what Kennedy said in the beginning anyway. Let the Vietnamese fight this thing if they really want to succeed. Let them. But the South Vietnamese army did not have any morale at all. They were like the Afghani army or the Iraqi army. They just didn't. There was no. The place was so corrupt, that any common soldier had no interest in losing his life in support of a cause.
That's full-time Oscar-winning director and writer Oliver Stone talking about his memoir, which is called Chasing the Light: How I Fought My Way into Hollywood from the 1960s to Platoon. Now, after the news, you'll hear us talk more about Platoon, about some of the characters he's come across during his decades in Hollywood. All of that's coming after the news headlines at 32 minutes past 2. Here's Alex Hunt.
On digital, BBC Sounds, smart speaker and online.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
Emergency services are at the scene of a major incident in Aberdeenshire where a passenger train has derailed. The Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon says there are reports that a locomotive and 3 carriages from the Aberdeen to Glasgow service left the track near Stonehaven just before 10 this morning. They have been affected by heavy rain and flooding overnight. The Chancellor Rishi Sunak says the UK faces hard times after official figures confirm the country has slumped into recession. The economy shrank by more than 20% between April and June compared to the first 3 months of the year. And Labour has described the government's handling of exam results in England as a complete fiasco after it was announced that schools could use mock grades to appeal. Pupils are not happy with their grades. Ministers say the changes will ensure pupils are not disadvantaged. The A-level results are published tomorrow. That's the latest news. Here's Deleth with the sport.
Anthony McGill has got off to a flying start in his semi-final at the World Snooker Championship. He's playing Kyron Wilson. Jamie Broughton is watching at the Crucible.
Anthony McGill said yesterday the atmosphere at the Crucible felt a bit flat without the crowd, but that certainly hasn't affected him today. He made breaks of 83 and 78 to take a 2-0 lead. Wilson then had chances in front.